Fantastic. So I have started recording. As you all probably know, this is a public and recorded meeting. It is January 28th. I've now started watching a bunch of these and publishing them, and so it turns out to be very convenient if I say the date at the beginning. So this is January 28th. We are going to talk about, first up, the 1.2 release milestone, so that TJ can jump off and head to his next meeting. Do we have a note taker for today? Can somebody volunteer and do that? We did get the notes published. We did get the videos published. The notes got published this morning on the Kubernetes blog, so feel free to share them if you want to get more people joining us. And the videos, the 4 videos that I had from the last month and a half, 2 months, have been published on the Kubernetes YouTube channel. And if any of you have recordings of other meetings, please feel free to send me those dates and we'll double check and see if we can publish those as well. But on to TJ.
Hey, so my name is TJ Goltermann. I'm a technical program manager here at Google. And so that is a title that is focused a lot around planning, scheduling, execution, all that kind of stuff to keep the trains running. And so my discussion point today is sort of about the 1.2 release cadence schedule. You see me? And so I sort of want to go over a little bit of the history real quick to put it in context of 1.0 and 1.1, and then get into sort of thoughts on 1.2. So basically 1.0 was definitely sort of push everything out the door. Lots of work to get that done last summer. 1.1 is where we sort of started to iterate and work on sort of our consistent minor version releases. And what we did for 1.1, and this was sort of last quarter of 2015, is basically set a 3-month release cadence so that the minor versions would come about every 3 months, and then broke that down into 8 weeks more or less of feature coding, writing new features and getting them into GitHub and the branch and testing them, followed by sort of a 4-week period where we don't let any more major features in. We kind of try to slow down the churn on the branch, fix lots of bugs, do our testing, and then do the release. And so basically that was our trial run for 1.1. For 1.2, we took sort of assorted feedback from the community and other places. And what we've done differently so far is we got feedback that the 3-month minor release version, people like that. They don't want us to go terribly fast, especially for people deploying on-premise. And so that seems to be positive. But then when looking at 1.2, some of the area that would be feature coding overlapped with holidays in November and December, where a lot of people were out of the office and not working. And so we lengthened the sort of coding time for features to account for that. And then we also found that for 1.1, the sort of 4-week period between calling it more or less feature complete and actually releasing the blessed 1.1 build was pretty tight. There's sort of a long tail of bugs to stabilize 1.1. And so for 1.2, we're looking at a 6-week sort of post-coding period for that. And then one other piece of feedback was that we want to minimize the time that the GitHub master branch is in sort of a code freeze, code slush. And so we want to iterate on our branching strategy to make sure that features for vNext can keep flowing, and that we cut the branch at the right time. And so sort of if you do the math, that would put for 1.2 our current milestone, feature complete. Goal was sort of end of January with a release in early March. So that's sort of the 6-week period there. The end of January, sort of I did a straw poll about a week ago on the major features I knew about that were coming in. Many of them were in and finished, probably 2/3 to 3/4, but the remaining 20–25% were not yet done. And as we talked last week in this meeting, we had a lot of testing that we thought. And so,
so in the event There's a link to a document, a Google document, and the first link in that document is the Hangout Zoom meeting.
Someone trying to break in the TJ or not on mute?
Sorry, that was me. I'm muted.
Okay. Bye.
No, I just want to make sure it wasn't a question.
Yeah, like, did we miss the question?
No, essentially we had some people that didn't know where the Zoom meeting link was, and the way I found it was through the document.
So it's in both the document and the calendar item.
Okay, the calendar item was wrong. It led me to a different place. So I don't know if that was my problem or what.
Let me go find the calendar. I'll go take a peek at the calendar item and fix that if it is.
Cool. Yeah, so then essentially what's happened is we more or less slipped feature complete. We were aiming for last week, but decided that tests were more important. And so I've been spending much of the last week, both at Google and in the community, fixing an awful lot of the tests to deflake them and make sure that's more solid.
Could you pause at that point? And I think one of the things that came up, but we may ask again at the end about release process. But since you said we decided blah, 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 could you discuss the process, like who was involved in the discussion, the process by which that decision was made, and the communication mechanism that was utilized to communicate that outside of this meeting?
Yeah, so it was basically output of last week's community meeting. A week ago today, and sort of the need to refocus on test. And then what happened was at Google, there was a meeting that came exactly thereafter to talk about precisely that issue. We also had seen the test had been an issue, and mostly it was an acute issue because the submit queue was blocked up. It was very difficult for anyone to get code in anyway. So focusing so heavily on trying to finish off features wasn't going to be effective if we can't get them through the queue anyway.
I'm going to be just very pointed. Was that an internal Google people only meeting?
It was an internal Google people only meeting because it was the how do we fix all of the currently blocked test and test infrastructure, the submit queue functionally, which right now Google is the majority owner of. There's not a lot of ways that people can get access to that.
So you'll certainly know from my comments last week that I'm entirely supportive and grateful of anything that puts this kind of testing to the top of the list. So it's really great, but I think what I'm really saying is this kind of meeting really, I think, should have been more open to the community generally, especially if there's decisions being made about the process. And, you know, one of the other comments that came up at the meeting last week was about sort of the opaqueness of some of the testing, and decision process here. So I think this is just I know this is, Google's put an awful lot of effort, has a huge number of people and got this project off the ground, but it seems like a good point to point out some places where kind of as an open source community, we need to make some progress.
So I will wholeheartedly agree with you on that, Bob, and point out that we had our first SIG testing group meetup group last week, the first SIG meeting for that, and two people from Samsung delightfully attended and then both said they couldn't help, they didn't have time. So if you also want to prioritize their time to help us, that's great. It will push us that much harder. But we also had a meeting just yesterday, and I believe that Ike is going to talk a little bit about both the SIG testing and the internal Google testing infrastructure meeting yesterday about how we are trying to find a way to build and prioritize something that makes it way easier for people externally to contribute. But so far, we have a lot of people saying we should be contributing and not a lot of people saying I have time for it. So
let's not conflate transparency of the process
100%
with contribution. And I think that these two things are tied. And I think that We're going to have to make some steps, and I guess I say we, I really mean Google in this case. Google is going to have to take some steps to be more open and inclusive for a while in order to get more involvement from the community over time.
Yep. Did you see my summary about the reprioritization of testing on Monday and big email saying, here's how you can help, here's what we're committing to do to you or do for the Kubernetes community to make it more transparent?
I did not see that, but probably a good thing to point it out here in this meeting. Thanks.
Yep. Big long email.
I did see that, and that was a great first step. But to sort of echo Bob's comments, what I'm sort of interested in, I was one of the Samsung folks who attended the SIG testing meeting, and what I got back was a lack of vision or clear commitment on how much of the testing work that we discussed was going to be done prior to the 1.2 release. And this brings me back to, I don't actually know what is officially slated for the 1.2 release. I don't know what officially is the code freeze date. I don't know officially when it's supposed to go out. And so if there were decisions made around this, I didn't get to see what those decisions were aside from your wonderful email, let alone participate in that discussion. And it's that I keep waiting to hear about during this community meeting.
Okay. So TJ has come in before and talked about the rough timeline. We can be more specific and make sure we get that more documented for you. But let's go back to TJ's what we are doing with 1.2, and this is all fantastic feedback for how we can improve what we have done in what we will do later.
Yeah. So then let's see, where are we? So 1.2, it sounds like, again, a pulse of looking at the GitHub issues for the features that are not yet completed. Hopefully we can wrap up sort of fixing the most acute test needs this week. And then it looks like another week will be needed to finish up the majority of those features. So if I had to sort of read the tea leaves, it sounds like end of next week is a viable feature complete to get most things in. That were listed high priority for 1.2 or that people sort of have in flight. If we then sort of do the math on end of next week, that gives us another 4 weeks to the original sort of early March date, which lands our sort of 3 months since last release cadence. We'd said in the past that 4 weeks has been a little tight from feature complete to actual binary release. Although hopefully that with the focus on tests earlier, some of that saves time there. And so I think that there's definitely a piece of this that is play it by ear. If there's major features people know of that are absolutely critical to get in 1.2, please let me and others know and speak up, and we will see what we can to get those in. And obviously, if, come mid to late February, build stability is still not there for the 1.2 candidate, we won't push anything out on a hard deadline. But it's the intent to still try to hit 1st of March.
So where can we go to actually track the status of what is slated for 1.2 and how much of it has been completed? For example, I noticed there's a 1.2 milestone in the Kubernetes GitHub project issues section. There's also a 1.2 candidate milestone. There are also a couple issues that talk about features proposed for 1.2. There's also a 1.2 roadmap document floating around somewhere. It's unclear to me what the source of truth is for this and then what the correct avenue is to who do I talk to get features slated into 1.2 if I really need to get them in last minute, that sort of thing.
I think that's completely valid feedback. There's a bunch of stuff in assorted places, and most of it is a graveyard and not kept up to date. The two things that I've noted that we need to get better at in 1.3 seems to be publishing and updating a schedule where people can give feedback at the beginning of the milestone and then tracking towards that, and also being very firm about which features are in or out. Or rather, I guess in or out's not really the right phrase. Obviously, the project will take any feature that is at the quality bar and comes in, but which are critical for the next release and things that we'd consider delaying the release for. And so for 1.2, I admit it's a bit messy. And my goal is for 1.3 that we absolutely nail this down. In the meantime, if anyone knows of something for 1.2 that's critical, I'd urge you to definitely either speak up now or send me an email. My email will be in the meeting notes, or send to me on Slack or GitHub. My handle is just my last name, Goltermann, and I'll make sure that that is taken into account, included for sure for 1.2. And then for 1.3, we just have to be more in the open about this.
It is something that we know and are working on. I think the favorite thing that I got to say last week was inviting me to this meeting doesn't mean that we have community buy-in. So this is something we are actively pushing on and trying to find ways to prioritize, making it more transparent, making it easier for people to contribute. And there's still just an activation energy here or an activation barrier here that we have to get through, getting a bunch of work that will make it easier for everyone to participate. And part of that is simply, as you have said, as you all have mentioned, transparency in how it has been planned, how we are planning currently, and more inclusion of people. So we will continue to bring TJ in to talk about what is going on with 1.2 and figure out ways that 1.3 planning can be far better.
Makes a lot of sense. And I really do appreciate attempts to make this more transparent. I do think we have some ways to go, but there has certainly been some progress made.
Progress made is the key point, and we'll continue to push on it, and do please continue to push on me. One of the best ways that works out is not just we want it to be more transparent, but I can help in this way if you make it possible for me to help.
Great.
I would say,
I think my suggestion or request would be, and maybe this is just a little ambiguous, I think having testing folks, TJ, show up is awesome, and I hope we hear from him every single meeting. But there's some difference between release testing process and overall like release planning. And I'm not sure if you're the person for that, Sarah, or TJ is really that with the test hat on, but who's the person on point for that?
Okay, so hold on. Let me tease this out a little bit. Right now, the person that has been leading the testing SIG, which, to be clear, has been around for a week, is Ike McCreery. And he is, I think, going to chat more or give a short update later, although I haven't seen him yet in the meeting. So, Ike, if you're here, you want to just drop a note into the chat and I'll know that you're here for your update. So he also works on the testing infrastructure here at Google. And that was one of the meetings that I attended yesterday, pushing very hard with getting testing to be more federated, testing to be more visible, and having the community be able to integrate and work with that testing in a much more meaningful way. And there is progress being made. I'll try and have Ike cover that if he has joined us this morning. TJ is the technical program manager for Kubernetes and Google Compute or Google Container Engine here. And so he does a lot of the wrangling of things like timelines. We also have, within the last 2 weeks, hired someone to manage releases. And I haven't brought him in yet to this meeting to talk with you all, but it sounds like we should add him for next week. His name is David, right? Perfect. So I will bring David to the meeting to talk about the planning for releases and his expectations and planning for how to make this a better experience. So we have 3 different people that are actually all trying to push these topics forward, plus myself, plus the rest of the team who is obviously in support of bringing the community in. It's just a matter of which thing first on a list that's way too long. So keep pressing us, but keep pressing us with, and I want to do this, and it'll happen faster, I bet.
That absolutely makes sense. This is maybe dragged on long enough, but one other tiny piece of feedback regarding the lack of a hard date for code freeze. Part of my concern is that the phrase code freeze has been tossed around through a couple SIGs throughout the week. And I think that's symptomatic of the fact that this is the only time where we get a weekly cadence broadcast to the community, but there's information that's changing that might be relevant to the whole community, but it only pops up briefly during the SIGs where some of the work is getting done. I oftentimes think that stuff surfaces during those SIGs that really should be made available to the community, and it shouldn't just wait for this meeting. Like, there's got to be a good, slightly more asynchronous way to notify people of this stuff. And it seems like maybe the Kubernetes dev mailing list could be a little more utilized for that, or more notifications in Slack. It's kind of unclear to me, but.
So my preference, and this is just one voice, would be that we send things that are more like SIG updates or SIG summaries from the conversations to the dev mailing list, because it is less likely to get lost in the chatter, as you might find happens in the Slack channels. Does that fit with others' experience?
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree with that, as somebody who sits on the network SIG looking for the right outlet for giving people updates.
Okay. So why don't we take that as a how we want to bring SIG updates going forward, and even if it's a 2-paragraph summary after a SIG meeting, at least it can start a discussion. If someone else on the SIG group thinks that this was, that there was another piece that was more important, they can chime in. So then you have just little summaries, and we can start more transparent discussion there, or transparent summaries at least of it. Awesome. All right. So now we have a plan for more communications. Of course, this means that the SIG groups have to appoint someone as a note taker, which usually happens, and that person sends a short summary. So we will get that moving forward. All right. Anything more on releases before we release TJ to his next meeting? Oh, come on. That was funny. You're all on mute, right? Thank you. The track laugh. All right. Fantastic. Then thank you, TJ. And clearly you will be coming back.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So we had next on our agenda a demo from Jason Hansen at Deis. Jason, I did see you on here.
Yeah, I'm hiding here.
Okay. Perfect. Hi, Jason. This is Jason from Deis.
Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the case may be. I've been with engineering Deis for 5.5 years and wanted to kind of show what the status of our alpha is. Deis implements a Heroku-inspired workflow for taking source to image to then deploying and managing that application across a series of nodes. V1 was based on CoreOS and Fleet. And as we're moving toward V2, we've decided to re-platform on top of Kubernetes. So I'll demo the alpha version, which is currently out there. Let me share my screen here. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Cool. Okie doke. So the current work is going up at github.com/deis/workflow, which is where all of the V2 stuff is landing. As you can see, we sit on top of a Kubernetes cluster. We implement a simple REST API. Developers interact with that portion of the platform through the Deis CLI, which I'll show, and then they ship code into the platform via Git push. As we've moved into the Kubernetes sort of universe, one of the things that we want to be is a good Kubernetes citizen. So we fully expect Deis managed applications to live co-located with Kubernetes native workloads. So whatever that happens to be. Deployed via deployment manager, deployed via Helm, or deployed via your existing process. To that end, all of the applications created by the Deis platform exist in their own namespace. There's a service that's bound to the lifecycle of that application, and then replication controllers are created for each of the versions of the application as code is pushed into the platform or configuration changes are made. So right here, I've got a 3-node Kubernetes cluster that's running on AWS. And here you can see all of the various pieces of the Deis platform. So we've got Builder, which is responsible for source to image, a database, which is responsible for persistence, a small etcd cluster, Minio, which is our development solution for on-cluster object storage, a dedicated Docker image registry, an edge routing component, and then the workflow, which is the API surface area that handles authentication, sort of coordination between all of the various bits and pieces. So on my machine here, I've just got a simple Go-based application that is relatively straightforward, just runs a simple web server. So what we'll do is I'll use the Deis CLI and just do a create. So this created an automatic name for us, web cut purse. I have no idea what that actually is, but that's that. So you can see here, we'll take a look at this namespace. Right now there's nothing there because I haven't pushed any code into the platform yet. And a git remote has been added to my repo here. So if I git push Deis master, set key, this pushes the graph up, and internally we launch a new pod, which is taking the source code and building a slug and then pushing that to object storage. Once that is done, the platform then creates the service, the replication controller, with the replicas count set to 1. So that is all up and running. At which point, the developer could scale, so Deis to scale web equals 5. What this will do is talk to the controller. Oh, is that a question? No, maybe just some feedback. Modifies the replica count for the replication controller, and Kubernetes does what Kubernetes does best. One of the other things that we do is we take build, so some version of the source, plus the configuration that's set for the application that represents a release. So if I config set this will create a new release. So a new configuration is coming from the developer. We join that with a set of environment variables for the replication controller, and then we will orchestrate a rolling deploy. Now, this should look familiar for anyone who's used kubectl rolling update. And as soon as the deployments object is released, 1.2, we will retool this to use those Kubernetes primitives. So as that rolls out and doing its thing, you can see that V2 is getting scaled down, V3 is getting scaled up. So now that that's done, you can see that we've created multiple releases. And I forgot to call this thing. You can see that this is powered currently by food. So we also support rollbacks. So what this will do is create yet a new release, but go back to the previous combination of the code plus the configuration for that version of the app. And as you can see, we're rolling to V4, replacing V3, and then that should go back to whatever the default powered by was. So this is currently alpha. I encourage folks to mess with it. I'll show how the platform is installed via Helm. I like to do the demo kind of in reverse because it takes DNS and updating load balancers and all of that tomfoolery. Any questions at this point? Cool. Yeah, I'll throw the slides up, and I'll also add some links into the community meeting notes that have more information about the alpha and then where to give feedback to the Deis open source team. Okie dokie. So generally when you're starting with a, oops, install this. So I'm going to remove the platform, and you can watch this disappear like Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future. I'm going back in time. So for folks who don't know, we also created a package manager called Helm. It's kind of inspired by Homebrew. It's a simple way to store a set of repositories or a set of manifests in a repository and then interact with them using Helm CLI tool. So you can download, fetch, edit. We just added template generation support in 0.3. This is how we're currently installing the Deis platform. All right, so Helm supports multiple repositories. The Deis chart repository is currently where the Deis alpha lives. And then Helm also ships with a set of charts that have example things like Redis, standalone Redis clusters, so on and so forth. Helm Target uses kubectl under the covers, so you know what you're pointing at. Helm install Deis. This just walks through and basically creates all of the various Kubernetes resources. You can see them slowly come back. The platform takes a minute to converge as the etcd cluster sorts itself out, and all of the components come up. We're intending for all of these components to be reusable on their own, so if you do need edge routing, you can take a look at Deis Router and use it in your own project. We expect separate release life cycles for each of these various platform components as we move forward. So thoughts would be great there. We are currently working toward beta. We're still moving some of the load-bearing posters around the house, and once that's done, we'll cut a beta release and announce that to the Deis users mailing list. So if you're interested in learning more about that release when it's done, I encourage you to join that mailing list. And that's all I got. Double thumbs up.
Excellent. Thank you. Do you have any questions for Jason?
Do you also have a web console, or is it all just driven through the CLI?
Right now it's driven through the CLI. We are adding an administrative component to it, just so the operators of the cluster can see what the status of all of the various components are, what versions they are, where they're running, what their health is, but not at this point. There's not a developer-facing sort of web UI. Like create an application, deploy it, manage it through the web UI.
So the admin piece you're talking about is more like a dashboard than a control plane.
Yeah.
We also had a question from Vidya. Is the workflow your release workflow being defined outside of the labels?
So one of the things that we are doing is with the service, all of the applications get their own namespace, and then the label, which I should have actually dumped the replication controller. Usually folks don't know a lot about Kubernetes, so I just gloss over all of the important details. So each of the applications gets a label, the version is labeled, and then the replication controllers select their pods based on that. So we have a set of conventions internally that we've used for that, and expect to be using additional Kubernetes resources. So the way the deployments API resource works will be the way that we deploy applications. So it should feel very natural for someone who has done Kubernetes native stuff to interact with applications that are deployed and managed by Deis. Does that answer your question there?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I do have a bad throat, so I'm going to go back to typing.
Helm currently calls out to a kubectl binary. So whatever the auth and context set for your kubectl environment is what Helm uses to interact with your cluster.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, no, that was just a thank you. All right, well, yes, many thanks to you, Jason. This was fun to see. And are you or someone from Deis coming to CoopCon in London?
We will be there, indeed.
Excellent.
So, drop by the booth and stay. I'm designing new stickers too, so we'll have all sorts of little.
Yay! Because stickers, of course, are the currency of open source.
Indeed.
There you go.
When is CoopCon? I can probably look it up as well. I'm just curious.
The CoopCon in London is happening March 10th and 11th, and the call for proposals is open until the 5th of February. And we would love many more proposals about awesome things that people are doing with Kubernetes, on Kubernetes, next to Kubernetes, around Kubernetes, all the different ways you can interact with it.
Oh, great. That's good to know. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Jason. And I think we do. I was worried we weren't going to have time to get an update on testing, but I think we do have a time to get an update on testing, and Ike has joined us. So more on the test surge that we're doing and the nascent testing SIG.
Yeah. So yeah, a couple things there. The testing surge internally at Google is going pretty well. We're closing bugs quickly, and the submit queue seems to be picking back up again, which everyone here is excited about, and I expect folks on the outside are too. There is still a lot of work to be done there. We have been putting a few things in place to try to document better what kinds of things the community outside can do. We are still using the kind flake label, and those issues are open for the taking, and we would appreciate help. I think per usual, unit and integration tests are easier to tackle than end-to-end tests just because of the infrastructure required to run end-to-end tests. But we will be, continuing to do that. The other big news is that, yeah, we've started up the SIG testing meetings. We had one on Tuesday. They're going to be every Tuesday at 10:30. You can ping us in the SIG testing Slack channel and get information on how to join there. But the first meeting happened 2 days ago, and I'd say it went pretty well. We had some folks from Samsung and one other person who, not sure where exactly they were from, but the sort of overarching thing seems to be everyone wants better test infrastructure, and no one is really willing to prioritize that and cut other work. At least that was sort of the overarching thing that we heard in the meeting on Tuesday. So at Google, we are putting headcount on this. Myself, Joe Finney, and Jeff Grafton are all full-time on that, and we're about to get another person coming in full-time, and actually maybe yet another. And that's going to make things better, but we would really love to have some help from the outside. So, if you can, chunk out a day or two of the week and help out, there are concrete things that can be done. In particular, we've heard a lot that conformance testing is something that people would like more of if they have clusters up on different providers and want to know whether or not they're conformant. There's some tooling that exists. Aaron Krickenberg from Samsung has written up an issue about that, and Carl from Mesosphere has done some really great work on that, and we would love to have more. So if you are interested in putting in some time, definitely poke around that. And if you feel like you want to be putting in time but don't know where to start, ping us on Slack and we can definitely direct you in the right direction. And of course, join us for the SIG testing meeting.
So one of the things that I alluded to was yesterday's testing and the fact that we're looking at ways to make this more broadly federated, more broadly visible. I didn't think that we came to complete, this is the plan and we will have any sort of date on it. But as Ike mentioned, we have dedicated headcount now that is actually trying to look at this and make this more accessible and more community driven or engaged at the very least, because we know right now it sits behind the Google firewall, and so much of it is not even possible for somebody to unravel from the outside. But there are things, and the more we talk about where that doesn't work, then we will have better ideas of what to fix first. So again, finding and telling us where there is friction is a huge deal. So more involvement in the testing group is really the way to get this more attention.
Yeah, I definitely agree, stressing that point. We are a bit strapped for resources, but part of the ongoing battle is from inside Google. It's hard to tell what's hard from outside Google. And so, the conformance testing has been something that folks have said loud and clear. That is something that, we want more infrastructure around, and we're saying great, and we're going to prioritize it. And also we have a lot of other things that we're prioritizing. And so if folks on the outside want to put in hours there, it'll be better and it'll be faster. So that would be great. But yeah, definitely, we're around and absolutely more than happy to, unblock you as quickly as we can and answer questions and make this a more transparent and easy to contribute part of the project.
Yep. As I've mentioned a couple of times today, I think the best way to do this is to push us with specific, I want to help in this way and I can't, because that gives us more priority than please tell us how you're doing this thing. Because if you say I want to help, we want you to help. So we will figure out a way to make that go as quickly as we can. All right, any other questions for Ike?
I harassed Jeff and Quentin on Slack. Oh, and Jeff just said it's fixed. Never mind.
Awesome. Oh, and Eric also says submit queue now links to the reason for end-to-end failures, so they're not invisible anymore. That's right. There was work done to do that. There's been a bit of work done this week also to make it easier for people to see the logs with when a Googler drops a URL in for what the logs actually are. So we're trying to make this more transparent. It is all incremental steps though. So knowing where the friction points are and the pain points and where you can help, if we did something to help you is really the foundation for this change. And Joe just dropped a link in for all the SIGs. Yay! Okay.
No questions. I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Ike and the rest of his team. They have done phenomenal work in improving the conformance testing. They've done a lot of work around testing the upgrade process. So there's now a really in-depth 7-step job that tests out migrating from a previous version of Kubernetes to a new version of Kubernetes. I believe this was one of the larger pain points in going from 1.0 to 1.1. So I'm pretty happy to see that a lot of effort has been put into that. It's like we're all complaining, and it is definitely not great today, but it is significantly better than it was. Even if it is all still a lot of bash that's really dense, I can tell a lot of effort has been put in, and we are much better off than we were yesterday.
Yes, +1. The merge bot has been much busier in the last 48 hours than the prior 48 before that. Thank you, everybody.
We have been having daily war rooms about getting rid of these test flakes so that we can get the merge bot pushed through, or the merge bot working again. So
yeah, there's one. Since we're on it, there's one other thing that I'm super excited about, which is I've been doing some work to partition the tests more clearly. So we now have clear labels on all of the tests about what can be run in parallel and what can't be run in parallel. And that also should mean that we should be able to crank through test results a lot quicker because we can run tests, more effectively and efficiently because we know what the limitations of tests are. And that should be coming along and also speeding things up a bit. So
there was also discussion yesterday about making it clear how to test. If you want to run a test, how do you run this test, and how is it currently run by the automation, and how would you run it if you wanted to run it individually, and what are the presumptions of it? So again, more documentation, more communication, more transparency about how things should work, and then you can tell us that that doesn't work for whatever reason, and we can try and fix it.
And all that is to say as well that if other folks have cycles to put in, this will move faster.
That much faster, exactly. Awesome. All right, any further questions for Ike or for me, or do we close up with a couple of minutes, or does someone else have a SIG report that they want to do? I mean, we've got a few minutes of spare time.
My question is around best practices and around labeling, not just for tests, but across the board for all workflow and other labels. Are there not just best practices, but already known ways in which there are tools built on top of these labels, so we can leverage some of that?
There are, and that is probably another piece of documentation that needs to be built. So let me put that as either to do for us to talk about things here, or for us to generate an artifact about labels and what they do.
Yeah, I agree that that's a piece of documentation that would be helpful. Just as a quick overview, the important ones are, we have priority labels, which have to do with, what the community thinks is highest priority. P0 being the highest priority, P3 being the lowest, P2 being the lowest, 2 or 3. Another label for those who are new to the project, we label issues with help wanted. Those are issues that we've sort of flagged as probably good beginners projects for people who aren't as familiar with the project but want to get started and want to get their hands dirty. So you can search GitHub for that. We also classified labels by team and area, so you can look through the labels there and see we have team for user experience and test infrastructure and cluster and control plane, and then also different areas for things like performance. So those are the important ones that come to mind. There are other ones floating around, but we can definitely look. Are those the labels that you're talking about, the ones that we use on GitHub Issues, or were there other ones that you were thinking of that you weren't sure about?
Yeah, the GitHub Issues were the ones relevant to what you were talking about. I'm still new, so I am trying to figure out how the selector labels in the Kubernetes product itself is being used. And so while you're asking about that, again, there's documentation or best practices around that will be helpful as well.
Are we talking about labels on issues or labels on objects for running Kubernetes in a running Kubernetes cluster?
I think we're talking about issues on labels on issues in GitHub.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood. My mistake.
All right, any other questions?
Hey, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else is talking too.
Okay, how about Rob first, and then whoever I have not yet identified.
So we had seen some earlier work at late last year about some deployment, Ansible documentation objectives and things like that. And SIG config is not really about deployment. And so I was wondering if there's interest in a SIG deployment SIG.
So I had this as a requested topic about deployment patterns and good patterns around that, and I have it labeled volunteers to lead. Does this mean you might volunteer to lead a conversation?
I was willing to do that, yes.
Awesome. Do you want to be on the agenda for next week or the following week to just sort of have a how do people do it, what's the best practices conversation about it?
I'd be willing to be on the agenda next week, and that would to kick off a SIG, and start the conversation. I'm not sure I'll have a lot of answers, but maybe get the right questions.
Perfect. I will add you to the agenda for next week then.
Awesome.
All right, so someone else is trying to talk.
Hey, Sarah, Bob Wise here again.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, you had earlier asked me to make a comment, and we actually spent a fair bit of time on the SIG scale meeting this morning. So the general topic is actually pretty closely related to testing. We had an incident here in the past week or so of some tests related to performance SLAs for the system get relaxed in order to get the test to pass, and certainly showed some, I'll say, process issues around how that kind of thing needs to happen. And I think the Kate Scale group feels pretty strongly that there's a, I'll say, poorly known, documented set of constants through the system that are really should be kind of, from a testing perspective, should be treated with the same level of care that, say, an API change is, because these tests are so critical. So I think we have kind of an outline of a proposal for just using the SIGs, or either a subset of the SIGs, probably SIG testing and SIG scale, for kind of a notice policy if these tests are being changed. And my goal is in the next week, let's say before the next meeting, Aaron and I are going to work on writing a doc PR to try to propose something. So just wanted to give everybody an update that we were thinking about that and working on that, and to please touch base with me on it all. So Red Hat's Tim St. Clair has been working with us on this as well. So
yep, I've had a few conversations with him, and the big long email that I wrote on Monday that you didn't read was going to reference that. So you couldn't possibly have known, was going to reference that, but we ended up deciding that specific references in that were not necessary because people had been paying attention, and that was pretty clearly discussed even in the pull request of, hey, we shouldn't have done that. So I didn't end up putting that in, but there have been internal conversations about we can't do that just to allow the testing to go through. And if it looks like it needs to be done, then there needs to be a broader discussion about it. So I'm completely open to let's try and make this a little more formal. I'm also a big fan of not having too many pain point policies, but having a known best practices on this is a really good idea.
yeah, I think our intention is to make just like a really lightweight kind of notice thing will be the proposal. There's probably something else we should do, which is to get that set of constants kind of centralized into a well-documented place. It's easy enough to make a policy like this, but it would be probably pretty easy for someone to accidentally change something and not realize that they had just tripped across this problem. So we should probably do some work to improve that as well over time.
Yep. Awesome. Well, I amusingly or sadly, because so much of testing is still opaque to the community, I think this is another Google to do. So yeah, so I will take it as such, and we will see what we can do from there. The labels and what they do, that strikes me as something that anybody who's been working on the project for a while could do. So if someone wants to pop up and write a draft of that, that would be awesome.
Sounds like a great topic for the next SIG testing meeting, honestly, is just maybe studying through what all the labels mean and why we're trying to partition them up that way.
Yeah, I think we're talking about two different kinds of labels there. And I think
sorry, we are.
The labels to denote, testing environment stuff. And then there's also the labels for, like, when we put a label on a GitHub issue, what does that mean? And actually, I nodded my head at the testing contents documentation being a Google to do. I actually think that, maybe Bob, you and the rest of your folks might be great people to contribute that too, since it sounds like you had, you experienced that pain immediately. And so, knowing where it would be helpful to put that stuff and what exactly you would like in that document. Obviously, over at Google, we're happy to contribute as well and help. But, I do think that's something that someone outside of Google could also drive.
Okay, I think that makes a ton of sense. Just for what it's worth, we were thinking about looking at moving the documentation for the responsibilities of the build cop and the Google staff who are watching the infrastructure out of the wiki and into a document, and then probably opening up a pull request to modify that document to talk about this policy. Is that the correct approach?
If I had 3, I would give you 3.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep. Yes.
Awesome. All right. Anything else? We will be kicked out of this room in 4 minutes, but I'm happy to spend those 4 minutes with you if there is something else we need to talk about. Joe's going, nothing here.
I've got a less than 4 minute item, which was a couple of times trying to find the time for meetings for SIGs has been difficult because you have to just kind of read through all of the emails in the archive.
Yep.
I know that networking has a calendar. I know that storage has one, but getting access to them is not fun. So if we could get an organized location, I'm going to put at least the networking one on the wiki page, but I don't know all the other ones.
Right. So I also had this problem, which meant that when I first came on, I made a document which is now sorely out of date, which had all of this, but it was just a spreadsheet, and the goal was to move it to a real SIG, Google Calendar SIG, so that when people created when they created SIGs, they could just invite the public calendar, and then people could have all of the SIGs, and they could choose which ones they wanted to attend and pull onto their own calendar. And the other calendar that is on my list to do is a public events calendar, so that we can put that up onto Kubernetes.io, because that's being reworked right now. And so we will move to having an events calendar there that people can invite, and then there's at least sort of a pull request to accept the event and put it onto the calendar. For lack of a better description on that. But anyway, the invitation allows a little bit of curation, but we want it to be fairly light. So both of those are on my to-dos. If someone wants to start one of those and move them forward more rapidly, again, this is if the community really wants something done, then getting a start on it and pushing us to help, us Googlers to help, is a great way to move things, because if there is attention and focus from the community, we can often match it. Whereas we will prioritize things based on our own perceptions if we don't have someone pushing from the community side. So it is on my list for both of those, the SIG calendar and the events calendar. But if one of you wants to get started on it, hit me in email or on Slack, and we can find space to work on it together. All right. That takes us to 1 minute. So thank you all for joining, and we will again do this next week. So if you have items that you want on the agenda for next week, let's build that out. We're looking for a demo. We're looking for use cases. We're looking for SIG updates if you think there's going to be something interesting. And we will all chat again next week. And I have a couple of items that I'll dog as well with regards to documentation requests. All right. See you all next week.
Thanks.
Thanks.